Hello, dear friends. Welcome to this final part of the coming of civilization. It's a wonderful book, history book that's over 50 years old, that gives us an insight or an overview into the individual cultures and civilizations that have popped up in the, infancy of civilizations. We start this part with the Franks. Here we have a bit of Central Western Europe, I suppose. Charlemagne was the first of the Holy Roman Emperors, crowned by Pope Leo III. In return for papal backing, he promoted church affairs and education. Many of the great European monasteries and monastic orders were founded by the Franks. So under Charlemagne, the kingdom of the Franks emerged as the successor to the Roman Empire in the west. But culturally it proved no match for Byzantium, and its unity disappeared soon after Charlemagne's death. Look at this lovely gold reliquary set within precious jewels, which is a fine example of the superior quality of Frankish art. So the collapse of Rome signalled the rise to power of the Germanic Franks. Between 481 and 800, they built up a star-shaped empire with its points in modern Spain, Normandy, Denmark, Hungary and Italy. It became the first truly European Christian empire, and one of its important legacies was the establishment of many great monasteries, centres of learning and art. Under Charlemagne, the empire reached its peak and challenged Byzantium as heir to Rome. The Franks were the northernmost of the Germanic tribes, attacking the old Roman frontiers. By the 200s, they settled along the middle and lower Rhine River. The northern Franks allied themselves to Rome and moved southwards into Gaul. When the northern leader, Clovis I, united all the Franks into an orderly Christian empire, the Pope readily supported him. Clovis established the Merovingian dynasty and reigned for 881 to 511. So the period of the Frankish Empire before Charlemagne is often called the Dark Ages, but the arts actually flourished in northwest Europe. Information about them comes mainly from finds made in graves of the period. Much jewellery as well as normal grave goods were based on Roman originals. Frankish jewellery is very distinctive, the early forms copying late Roman belt buckles. Massive gold brooches are typical, often heavily set with garnets, ornamented with gold or silvery filigree, and sometimes using late Roman gold coins as pendants. Particularly rich Frankish graves have been found at various places such as Cologne and outside Paris. So here we have one in Rome. To act as judge over Pope Leo III's trial, Charlemagne was tricked by him. The Pope put an emperor's crown on the unsuspecting king's head. In crowning him Emperor of the West, the Pope sought to enhance his own power and status. And here the power of the Frankish Empire lay in Charlemagne's own military leadership. At his death, there was little left to sustain its strength. That's the problem, guys. Never be a guardian of power, a guardian of knowledge. Share it as much as you can to make sure that there is longevity there. Subscribe for more empire building tips, courtesy of the English gentleman. You're welcome. The Franks conquered several other Germanic tribes, and by the 700s their empire covered much of Western Europe, but it was disunited into several kingdoms with shifting borders. Its main kingdoms were Neustria, roughly modern France, Austrasia, roughly the Netherlands to southern Germany, and Burgundy, roughly eastern France to Switzerland. After 639, the Merovingians became known as the Idle Kings because real power had passed to the mayors of the palace. The popes continued to support the Franks, seeing through their power the best hope for the church's survival through dangerous times. Their wisdom was confirmed in 732 when the energetic mayor Charles Martel decisively defeated an invading Arab Muslim force near Poitiers. When Charles's son, Pepin the Short, deposed the last Merovingian king in 751, Pope Zacharias had hastened to crown him first king of the Carolingian dynasty. It's a bit harsh there that your name is Pepin the Short. Who did that to him? Pepin's son Charlemagne expanded the empire to its greatest extent. On Christmas Day 800, Pope Leo III crowned him Emperor of the West. Until Charlemagne, the Franks had lived in small, self-sufficient communities which had existed since pre-Roman times, where money had virtually no value because little trade existed beyond barter. Charlemagne reimposed a centralized government from his capital at Aachen in the north and gave land to nobles who worked as judges, administrators, and army commanders instead of paying rent. Poorer people had to provide food for the court and labour for the government projects. Charlemagne promoted the interests of the church, education, architecture, and art. In 843, Charlemagne's 3 grandsons split the empire between them. The western part, the Kingdom of France, soon fell prey to the Norsemen, whose raids were concentrated around present-day Normandy area. In 987, France fell to Hugh Capet, whose descendants ruled the kingdom for 800 years. Although when Capet took over, it had shrunk to little more than the area around Paris. Well, look what we have here, the English. So the history of England from the collapse of the Roman Empire to AD 1100 is one of invasion. First came the Jutes, Angles and Saxons, then the Vikings, and finally the Normans under William the Conqueror. Here, having united their 7 kingdoms into a loose confederation, the English later had to share England with the Danes. To the north of England, present-day Scotland, several kingdoms emerged. Here's Alfred's jewel, bearing an inscription reading, "Alfred ordered me to be made." It includes an enamel portrait of the king holding 2 sceptres. That's very rote, isn't it? That's malicious compliance. Alfred ordered me to be made. Among the Germanic peoples set in movement behind the collapse of the Roman Empire were the Jutes, Saxons, and Angles. They left their crowded homeland near the present-day Danish-German border, crossed the North Sea, and invaded southern Britain in around 450 to 550. Many of the native Britons fled to the west, where they preserved their Christian religion. By 827, the invaders had established the first permanent nation-state, which survived conquest by the Danes in 1013 and by the Normans in 1066. Roman civilization soon fell into decay after 407. An organised government gave way to control by local Celtic chieftains. One, called Vortigern, is said to have invited 2 Jutish leaders, Hengist and Horsa, to land in Kent in 449 because he needed an ally against marauding Picts in the north. The invaders avoided the crumbling towns and moved along river valleys or Roman roads. They settled in forest clearings off the main routes to avoid attack by the next wave of immigrants, and by 613, almost all present-day England was under their rule. The 3 tribes lost their separate identities and eventually became known as the Anglo-Saxons. In the 500s, the Angles extended their kingdom of Northumbria northwards to the Firth of Forth. To the west of them, Britain set up the independent kingdom of Strathclyde. Then Scots crossed from Ireland to establish their own kingdom of Dalriada, north of Strathclyde, bringing with them their own form of Christianity. North of Northumbria, the warlike Picts had already established a southern kingdom and a northern kingdom. By the mid-700s, they also dominated Dalriada and Strathclyde. However, it was the culture of the Scots that survived in Dalriada and spread with the small groups who constantly migrated eastwards into the more fertile lands of the Picts and Angles, where their Gaelic language eventually replaced Pictish. Some Britons became slaves of the Anglo-Saxons, while others integrated with them, often by marriage. Those who fled set up kingdoms in Cumbria, Wales, and West Wales. A semi-legendary British warrior, Arthur, is said to have fought against the Anglo-Saxons in the 500s, and 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms developed by 600: East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Sussex, Mercia, Northumbria, and Wessex. The last 3 soon came to dominate the whole country and fought each other for supremacy for 200 years. Here we have an Anglo-Saxon warrior, displaced by the collapse of the Pax Romana, put to sea from the region of North Germany and Denmark, and easily took the area of southern Britain from the Romanized Celts. Here is the high-quality Anglo-Saxon metalworking, which came to light in 1939 when a great treasure, mostly gold, was found at Sutton Hoo, Southwark, England. The objects were found in a 25-metre-long ship in an East Anglian king's burial mound, including the helmet and shoulder clasps shown. Many years, a film starring Ralph Fiennes had come out called The Dig, which is about this. Very good. The Anglo-Saxons brought the old Germanic and nature gods with them into Britain, especially Odin and Thor, and destroyed Christianity wherever they settled. However, the Celtic Christians spread their religion through present-day Ireland, Scotland and northern England. In 597, St. Augustine of Rome landed in Kent and converted its people to Christianity. From there, Roman monks converted East Anglia, Sussex and Wessex. For a while, the Celtic and Roman forms of Christianity competed, but at the Synod of Whitby in 664, the Celtic Christians accepted the authority of Rome. Early Anglo-Saxon literature included the Hymn of Cædmon, composed in the 600s. About 100 years later, an unknown author composed the epic Beowulf. At Jarrow, the Venerable Bede wrote the ecclesiastical history of the English people. While the Anglo-Saxon kings warred against each other, Viking attacks began, but by 828 King Egbert of Wessex claimed to be king of all England. Welsh unity came about the same time, but it didn't last. Danish Vikings conquered all England except Wessex. King Alfred of Wessex fought them constantly, but in 886 he signed the Treaty of Wedgemore with Guthrum, the Danish leader. The Danes accepted Christianity and agreed to live in a vast area called the Danelaw. In 1016-35, King Canute of Denmark raided all England, but his Anglo-Scandinavian empire collapsed at his death. The last Vikings to arrive landed from Normandy. The Normans defeated the last Saxon king, Harold II, at Hastings, and brought all England under the iron rule of William the Conqueror in 1066. A very famous battle in English history indeed. And it seems quite prudent to talk about the Vikings. And here we see them here all spread all across the world, really. So the Vikings were expert sailors who used their seafaring skill to become pirates and coastal raiders. A Norwegian explorer, Leif Erikson, may have well been the first European to discover America. So they first put to sea as pirates, later as settlers. They raided England, France, and the Mediterranean. Swedes invaded Germany and Russia down to Constantinople, and Norwegians braved the bleak Atlantic westwards to Iceland, Greenland, and the coast of America. I mean, could you imagine in these kind of ships going this far in such cold, likely cold conditions? So the Norsemen lived in Denmark and the other colder lands of Norway and Sweden. Their own name for themselves was Vikings, men of the Viks or Creeks. They took to the sea in the 700s, seeking wealth through piracy and coastal raiding. They were probably forced to set sail because the climate in their homelands worsened, so reducing the productivity of their land. By contrast, the countries they raided seemed more attractive for settlement. Expert at shipbuilding, they became the most daring seamen Europe had ever known. Viking longships penetrated the seas and waterways of Europe and pioneered the route to North America. Viking voyages were seasonal. At home, they planted crops in the spring before beginning their expeditions and returned in summer to harvest them. Then they put to sea again to return in winter before the sea became too dangerous. Ashore, they processed salt, tar and fish and made tools and weapons. The Vikings built their long, shallow ships, sometimes as long as 100 meters, but typically 20 meters in length by 5 meters in width. These carried about 990 men. Oarsmen rowed the ship until they were out at sea, when they were hoisted in a single square sail. Using a steering oar, the early form of a rudder, they boldly set course to destinations most unknown to earlier seamen. At sea, the Vikings were unbeatable, but they avoided battles on land. Instead, landing in force at lonely points to steal harvests, plunder rich monasteries, and seize monks and nuns as slaves. They struck silently and speedily after hiding their boats. Those who survived their raids often starved to death. The Vikings gained an evil reputation for needlessly killing, burning, and destroying, but with more experience on land, they proved highly adaptable to different circumstances. For example, if they landed where horses were to be found, they soon learned to ride them skillfully. Becoming bolder, they attacked and captured walled towns, improving their fortifications, then used them as bases from which to found permanent settlements. Once settled, they prepared to repel the next wave of Vikings. Like the Anglo-Saxons before them, they gradually abandoned Odin and Thor, forgot their myths, and accepted Christianity. In general, the Danes advanced to the south, the Swedes to the southeast, and the Norwegians to the far west. So the main Danish attacks were made against the Franks and the English, and their efforts led to the complete but temporary conquest of England. In the Frankish Empire, they pursued more limited aims, but their conquest of Normandy was permanent. The Danes also attacked the Muslims in Spain and Morocco, and raided along the Mediterranean coasts. Swedish Vikings traded and plundered along the inland waterways of Germany, but their reputation was never as bad as that of the Danes. As fierce merchant warriors called the Varangians, they settled the coastlines and lakesides of the Baltic Sea and Finland, and a group of them called the Rus daringly penetrated the rivers of the vast land, which was later to be called Russia after them. It's interesting, I didn't know that. The Slav people of Novgorod on the Volkhov River are said to have invited the Rus leader, Rurik, to rule their city, hoping that his strong presence would bring peace and stability. Rurik founded a dynasty there in 862 that lasted over 500 years. His successor, Oleg, moved the Russian capital to Kiev about 873. Other Varangians sailed on to reach the Black Sea and the Bosphorus, raiding Constantinople in the 900s, until the Byzantine Emperor bought them off, employing some to serve him as his Varangian guard. Norwegian Vikings first seized and settled in the Hebrides, Orkney, Shetland and Faroe Islands. Their influence extended to Ireland, where they founded Dublin in 840 and held it until the Irish king Brian Boru defeated them in 1014. But the most daring Viking exploits were the Norwegian voyages to Iceland, Greenland and Finland, possibly modern Massachusetts. Leif Erikson led this North American landing about 1003, and his settlement probably lasted about 12 years before being abandoned by the Norwegians. Several Icelandic sagas describe these courageous exploits into the icy north. Before the year 1000, the Vikings had ceased to raid their neighbours and established stable kingdoms in Denmark, Sweden and Norway, and permanent settlements in Iceland and Greenland. Elsewhere, they integrated with the local peoples. Even the Normans evolved into the French and English, becoming staunch upholders of Roman Christianity. So impressive the sheer amount of impact that they had on the planet that we see today. Hugely influential. Also influential here we have the feudal system of Western Europe that provided the basis of stability from which the Renaissance blossomed. Non-land owning serfs were at the base of this social pyramid, with freeholders and landowners above them. So here are large areas of Western Europe founded stability in the feudal system that flourished in about 1100 to 1300. Feudal kingdoms extended from Scandinavia to Christian Spain. The Holy Roman Empire straddled Central Europe. And here sheep became highly important as medieval Europeans exchanged their skins and furs for woolen clothes. Spain and England were noted suppliers of raw wool, but by 1400 the English processed their own wool and sold it as finished cloth. So by about the year 1000, Viking raids and barbarian invasions ceased, as we just learned. Several kingdoms emerged, but heads of strong families sometimes held more power than the kings. These powerful lords kept private armies to fight wars both at home and abroad. And apart from the soldiers, most people worked as farmers or craftsmen in the village of their birth. They lived under the protection of the lord who owned their village, but were bound to him as serfs. This was the basis of the feudal system, under which land was leased in exchange for services. Feudalism reached its height about 1100 to 1300 in France, England, Germany, Scandinavia, Italy, and northern Spain. Despite many shortcomings, feudalism provided the basis of stability from which the brilliant civilization of Renaissance Europe later developed. In theory, all land belonged to the king, but he leased most of it to his lords. In exchange for their estates, they had to swear loyalty to him and to provide certain services, notably support in war. In England, a feudal estate constituted a manor, roughly a self-sufficient village, usually with its own castle and church. Such an estate was known as a signoria in France, a signoria in Spain, and a signoria in Italy. Each lord possessed several estates according to his status. He had a duty to his king to protect his estates, to dispense the king's justice, and to ensure that the land was cultivated according to traditional methods. In fact, the lord serfs in exchange for money rents. Freeholders could quit the estate at will, but most of the land was farmed by bound serfs who had to give part of their produce to the lord. They also had to provide week work, 2 or more days a week on his domain, and boon work at harvest time. Villagers also had to pay in kind for the use of the lord's mill and oven. Land outside the 3-field system was common. There anyone could feed cattle, poultry and sheep. Firewood could be gathered from the surrounding forest where pigs were let loose to eat acorns, but the forests were largely reserved as hunting grounds for the king and his lords, and poachers, when caught, received speedy execution. Farmers slaughtered most of their animals in late autumn and salted the meat for food throughout winter. Only a few animals could be kept and fed for breeding in spring. Here serfs formed the lowest rank of society after slavery died out, but changing times brought freedom and relative prosperity to some serfs by the 1300s. Above, freeholders formed a class between serfs and lords, able to leave the estate when they choose. Wealthier freeholders often employed serfs on their own account. Here, cropland was divided into 3 huge fields, usually rotated as wheat, barley or fallow fields on a 3-year system. Every household held a number of strips of about 1 acre, scattered throughout the 3 fields. Meadow, common and heath or wasteland provided grazing land and firewood. And here the lords of the manor held their land from the king to whom they had to swear allegiance. They also had to run their estates efficiently, dispense justice and maintain adequate military forces for defence or war. In all the feudal kingdoms, the church wielded great economic, political and psychological power. Bishops and other churchmen held land in their own right as feudal lords, and church lands tended to increase because guilt-ridden nobles often willed land to the church at death, hoping thereby to expiate their sins. The popes insisted that, as God's representatives, they held power of appointment or dismissal of kings. They threatened kings and other rebels against their authority with excommunication, which would cut them off from God in this life and the next. The church's ultimate weapon, the interdict, could excommunicate a whole nation. Few kings dared to flout the power that the church held over the minds of their subjects. On the other hand, the popes often needed the military power of strong kings to keep their own positions. Many serious disputes occurred between church and crown. In 1075, Pope Gregory VII and the German Emperor Henry IV began a bitter quarrel about which of them should appoint bishops. The dispute outlived them. Soon after, the papal lands around Rome were threatened by the massive Holy Roman Empire under Frederick Barbarossa in the north, and the Kingdom of the 2 Sicilies, ruled by Frederick's nephew, in the south. The Pope broke this domination only in 1266 when he reached a deal with the French monarchy, in which a French prince annexed the 2 Sicilies with papal blessing. When Pope Innocent III placed England under an interdict, its King John had to submit. On the other hand, Frederick II, who between 1196 and 1299 was successfully crowned ruler of Germany, Sicily, Italy, the Holy Roman Empire and Jerusalem, flourished despite excommunication. The feudal lord was primarily a warrior. At home he joined alliances for or against the ruling king, and abroad he fought alongside his king or draped in the cross, campaigned in the Crusades. He was supposed to observe the rule of chivalry, a moral and religious code that governed conduct in peace and war. Knights, originally a class of untitled warriors, supported their lords in battle and were recruited from squires, who began their military training as pages from about the age of 7. Knighthood became almost a cult, backed by its own traditions, such as jousting. Here we have much of life in Europe at the 1400s revolving around the streets rather than behind walls. Craftsmen made their products where they sold them. Drapers, bakers and candlestick makers plied their trades in public. Guilds imposed strict rules. One of the finest records of life in the feudal England is the Bayeux tapestry, a very famous tapestry. Band of linen, which were embroidered about 72 scenes representing the Norman conquest. So by the 1300s, cracks appeared in the feudal system. Changes in warfare rendered the barons' armies less efficient. When more money came into circulation, many lords found it convenient to receive money rents instead of services. Labour became scarce and therefore expensive. Rents, traditionally fixed, could not be raised. Many lords rented out their domains or turned to sheep farming. The decline of was speeded by the Black Death, a deadly plague that killed off a large proportion of Europe's people in 1348 and 49. Meanwhile, new ideas from Italy shook old beliefs. In England, feudalism had largely died out by 1400, but it lasted until 1789 in France and 1867 in Russia. The growth of towns and trade also speeded the end of feudalism. Towns flourished first in Italy, then north of the Alps, located where rivers provided fresh water and transport. In northern Europe, the Hanseatic League, an early common market of some 100 towns linking England to Russia, dominated international trade. The economic power of wealthy merchants undermined the feudal authority of kings, lords, and church. Moving us into the world we see today, effectively. Here we have the Africans. The African cultures that developed south of the Sahara were based on trading gold, slaves, and nature crafts to the Arabs. Native arts reached a peak in the magnificent Benin bronze sculptured heads. So this head of an Oni, king of Ife, Nigeria, cast in brass in the 1200s, represents a high peak in African art. Facial features, including scarring, are finely rendered. Except in the Arab north, Africa for a long time lay outside the mainstream of civilization. Then came African civilizations in Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Other centers of civilization include the Hausa states, Kanem, Borno, Axum, Ethiopia, and Zimbabwe. Now, while the Arabs developed their civilization in the North and Africa area, African cultures developed south of the Sahara, especially in Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. The scanty knowledge we have about these empires comes from Arab sources, especially the writings of the Arab geographer al-Bakri and the great Arab reveller Ibn Battuta. However, distinct styles of African culture have survived to influence modern artists, and traditional African music has greatly influenced the jazz and popular music of the 20th century. And pretty much all music. I think this is interesting that this book is written 50 years ago, of course, so it'll be interesting to see the perspective that we see. Is that the most ancient of black African states, the Kingdom of Kush, which had once ruled Egypt, fell to King Ezana of Axum in the AD 300s. Axum in Ethiopia prospered by controlling much of the world's ivory supply. Ezana, persuaded by Saint Frumentius, a Syrian apostle to the Abyssinians, Christianized his country in 333, developed a written language, constructed palaces and churches, spread its culture throughout Ethiopia. After northern Africa and the Red Sea coasts fell to Islam, Ethiopia remained an isolated Christian state, whose Christian culture continued up to present times. The Europeans knew it only in legend as the land of Prester John. Further south along the coast, north and south of Zanzibar, Muslim traders from the Persian Gulf and southern Arabia founded several city-states. The prosperity of these states attracted African migrants from the interior who developed a distinct language and culture of Swahili. Ibn Battuta, who visited the island city-state of Kilwa, wrote that it was a flourishing crossroads of trade between southeastern Africa and countries as far east as China. The mainstay of Kilwa's trade was gold, which came from the region of Zimbabwe. The fortified settlement of Zimbabwe, first built between 1000 and 1400, later declined, but revived under its Ros Vikings, who constructed its largest buildings in the 1500s. The settlement declined and ended abruptly in the 1830s when Zulu warriors destroyed it. During the 300s, Berbers from Libya migrated southwestwards across the Sahara and organized the Mandingo-speaking people into the Ghanaian Empire. According to al-Bakri, Ghana was the title given to the emperor, who ruled through chiefs subject to him. The Ghanaians later expelled their Berber overlords to bring the empire back under black rule by 700. To the Arabs, Ghana was the land of gold, but the gold did not originate in Ghana. Simple traders brought it from the south to the fringes of the empire to exchange it for basic necessities such as salt from the north. The exchange took place through a strange kind of dumb barter in which the traders themselves did not speak and usually didn't even meet. Other traders then took the gold to the Ghanaian capital. This stood at the centre of trade routes, along which passed ivory, gum, ostrich feathers, cola nuts, and slaves. Berbers kept control of the main trade routes, along which they had early introduced camels. The Moroccan Almoravid movement, a religious reform movement which had reunited all the Berber tribes in about 1042, reconquered Ghana in 1076. However, their heavy-handed intervention destroyed the trade along with the empire, and the Ghanaian capital, then Columbia was finally destroyed by the Mandingo king Sundiata in 1240. King Sundiata laid the basis for a new empire, Mali, which enhanced its status with the Arabs by adopting the Muslim religion. When Emperor Mansa Musa made the pilgrimage to Mecca, he distributed so much gold that the Cairo money market was thrown off balance. Tombouctou, now Timbuktu, became a leading centre of Muslim learning, and together with Gao, a great trading centre. The Arab traveller Ibn Battuta remarked on the number of lawyers there and on the high standard of justice. He praised the schools with the many books and classes of music and dancing, but had little respect for Mali's architecture. In the 1400s, Mali underwent internal decline, speeded by attacks from the Tuareg and other southern peoples. Then a subject people of Mali, the Songhai, captured Tombouctou, Jien, and Gao and established their own empire. Under the emperors Soni Ali and Askia Mohammed, Songhai became the strongest African power. But Islam, which had strengthened Mali, brought the downfall of Songhai as it provoked opposition from the upholders of the old tribal religions. Moroccan jealousy of Songhai's control of the trade routes exploded into hatred when Songhai took the Takasa salt mines. In 1590-91, the Moroccan Sultan Ahmed IV al-Mansur sent a small army equipped with English firearms to defeat the cavalry and bowmen of Songhai. The Moroccans took Timbuktu, Jien, and Gao. They deported Songhai's learned men to Morocco and stole or destroyed their books. The Moroccan army then refused to recross the desert and set up a weak state of their own. Mandingos and Tuaregs attacked them, and the civilisations of Ghana, Mali, Songhai disintegrated. Here, iron smelting in Africa was first practiced by the people of Kush, who learned it from the Assyrian conquerors of Egypt. This picture shows an iron smelting furnace, bellows still used by some tribes in Zimbabwe. Here's a lovely proud figure of an African king on a horse that represents one of the best pieces of bronze working in the Kingdom of Benin. Isn't that fantastic? This animal hunt, illustrated on a rock painting from Tassili, Algeria, shows the lively movement of prehistoric art in the Sahara. Early North African paintings portrayed a wealth of animal life, and nearby pictures have been found of war chariots, humans, and animals. So east of Songhai, several Hausa states flourished, famed for their fine leatherwork, which was exported north and known as Morocco leather. Around Lake Chad, the Muslim state of Kanem-Bornu drew inspiration not from Morocco but from Egypt. Kanem-Bornu lacked the economic strength of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, but it grew into a formidable power under King Idris Aluma, who used Turkish firearms and military techniques. Kanem-Bornu succumbed only to European invasion in the 1880s. Nigeria has a tradition of sculpture dating back to the Noor culture of 2,000 years ago. By 1200, the city of Ife, sacred to the Yoruba tribe, produced superbly sculptured heads in terracotta and bronze, which was cast by the lost wax process. By the 1400s, African bronze heads reached new standards of excellence in the secular court art of Benin. Almost all other African art stemmed from religion, such as ancestor figures. Now, much of the rest of African art came from the region between Nigeria and Zaire. From little survives. Objects made of perishable materials such as wood or straw rotted in the humid climate, were eaten by ants or burned in war. Muslims and Christians destroyed the works of art they found, damning them as false idols, which is a big shame. Now, although the number of languages spoken by the peoples of Africa was about 2,000, their music had a common pattern, bound up with drums and dancing. Essentially spontaneous, it nevertheless kept within traditional patterns of melody and rhythm. One purpose of the drum dance was to work the dancers up to a frenzy of religious zeal, so their drumming was hectic and insistent. African religion, like African art, had a common basis. At one level was the belief in a supreme god, and at another that there was a belief in many gods and in the power of the spirits of ancestors. Men had to live at peace with these powers. Therefore, the supposed intermediary between man and gods was a specialist in magic known as a witch doctor. Age-old folk myths gave explanations for every aspect of daily experience. Africans recited these tales from one generation to the next, for outside Ethiopia they had no written languages. A Songhai tale was told of a chief who went fishing at night and found a small sheep in the middle of the river. As he recited magic spells in fright, the sheep turned into a baby. The chief shouted for help, knowing that he'd seen a Zin, a water spirit, and when the villagers found the chief, he was dead, for the sight of a Zin meant death for mortals. I love those kind of tales. We have here the Japanese. Of course, I have a concurrent series running alongside this one at the moment of the Golden Age of the Samurai, which is proving a very interesting look into a very distinct period of Japan, which I imagine there'll be some crossover here. And the uniqueness of Japanese arts and crafts stems from the fact that they evolved in relative isolation from the Asian mainland. Origami, kabuki theatre and flower arranging are just some of the new art forms that flourished. Because Japan developed both because of its isolation and nearness to China, from which it borrowed heavily. Expressive masks cover the face of all male actors in Japan's highly stylized knot plays. So cut off by 200 kilometers of sea from the Asian mainland, Japan developed in isolation. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, storms and winds lashed the rocky and fertile Japanese islands, giving rise to the belief in an infinite number of kami, nature spirits, or kami. These were thought to control every aspect of life within the religion of Shinto. Into Japan's closed society of the mid-500s came Chinese priests bringing Buddhism, along with China's art and written language. From this clash of cultures emerged a new civilization, which incorporated, amongst other things, several unique arts. In 794, Emperor Kamu established his capital in Kyoto, and from there his descendants reigned as Gonds for over 1,000 years, although they had little authority. As in medieval Europe, the real power lay with feudal families or clans who fought unceasing civil wars. Eventually, about 858, the Fujiwara clan gained power and reduced emperors to puppet status. The Fujiwara ruled for 300 years, but then split into two factions, one of which called the Taira clan to fight its battles, the other faction called in the Minamoto. Both clans had ambitions to oust the Fujiwara, and the Taira finally succeeded about 1160. Once in power, they constructed harbours, dredged shipping channels, developed trade with China, and generally improved the economy. But the Minamoto overthrew the Taira in 1185. The Minamoto set up their Bafuku military government at the Kamakura near Tioka Bay, and in 1192 persuaded the emperor to give Minamoto Yoritomo the title of shogun. Minamoto shoguns ruled from Kamakura until 1333, when Ashikaga Takauji became the first line of Ashikaga shoguns who ruled from Kyoto. So the Ashikaga shogunate was a period of turmoil, during which the power of the shoguns often sank as low as that of the emperors. Local lords increased their power, but many warriors lost their status to become peasants. Meanwhile, some poor people pushed their way up into a new aristocracy. The upheaval led to certain improvements. Cultural activities flourished, encouraged by the shoguns and Zen Buddhist monks, and the metalworking, weaving, papermaking, and other industries expanded. Many small marketplaces grew into bustling towns, and the new city of Osaka grew to rival Kyoto. As a result, trade with China boomed. The Japanese also built ships and put-to-sea expeditions financed by feudal lords and merchants. By 1400, Japan dominated the East China Sea that was rife with Japanese pirates. Fujin here, the god of the winds, carrying his bag of winds slung across his shoulder. Japan's Shinto Buddhist religion includes the belief in an infinite number of kami spirits, which may vary from a volcano to a tree, or even the concept of happiness. And here is a tea ceremony, a ritual, one of several uniquely Japanese arts that combines national traditions with deep symbolic meanings. So by the 1600s, Japanese artisan mastered Chinese techniques in sculpture, ceramics, woodworking, jewelry, lacquer, bronze, architecture, painting, and calligraphy. They produced their own, essentially Japanese styles in an amazing variety of media and fashion. Swords and sword furniture, miniature gardens, and origami became new art forms. Ladies of culture were marked by their skill in delicate flower arranging and by their peaceful and ritualistic tea ceremonies. Literature paralleled the development of these visual arts. One of the world's greatest novels, The Tale of Genji, was written by a Japanese lady of court nearly 1,000 years ago. no plays, bunraku and kabuki developed as unique forms of drama unrivaled in the Western world. Kublai Khan attacked Japan in 1274 and again in 1281, but with the help from the weather, the Japanese beat off both Mongol attacks. The next foreigners to land in Japan, the Portuguese, brought two disrupting innovations: firearms, about 1542, and the Roman Catholic religion. Despite Buddhist opposition, the Catholics claimed 300,000 converts within 2 generations. In the late 1500s, a humbly born general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, seized power from the crumbling Ashikaga shogunate. He evaded Korea in 1592 and 97, but the Chinese forced him to withdraw. His successor, Ieyasu, founder of the Tokugawa shogunate, crushed Christianity in Japan and sealed off its island's borders. For over 200 years, the threat of execution hung over Japanese trying to leave Japan or foreigners trying to enter. We learn about these three in that Golden Age of the Samurai series, so do check it out if that's a period of history you are particularly interested in. We've been hearing about them regularly throughout the last few chapters, but Genghis Khan and his savage nomadic Mongol holds built up the largest empire the world has ever known. They also enabled Eastern and Western cultures to meet. The magnificent Taj Mahal in India was a development of Mughal art. A huge area here. So Mongol peoples drained the energies of the Chinese from the beginnings of their history by constant invasions. Tribes later called Huns speeded the end of the Roman Empire, and Turkish tribes seized the leadership of Islam from the Arabs. By about 1300, the Mongols had burst across Asia and into Europe to build the largest empire the world has ever known. And although these savage conquerors spread terror across 2 continents, they also brought benefits. Through them, Chinese culture spread to Persia and beyond. The East and West came into contact for the first time. Having been pushed north of the Great Wall of China by the Qin emperors, the Mongols inhabited the inhospitable Gobi Desert and land westwards to Central Asia. Mounted on small horses, they wandered this arid area in search of pasture for their sheep, cattle, and goats. These provided them with their basic necessities: milk, cheese curds, meat, furs, and skins. Mongol populations moved like large armies, with teams of oxen dragging wooden wagons that held their vast tents or ger. In the drier regions, the Mongols harnessed a Bactrian, 2-humped camels to pull their high-wheeled carts. Constant movement meant hard work, loading pack animals, guarding wagons, hunting and defending the camps. Both men and women wore a long sack-like garment fastened at the neck over trousers, and in freezing weather they donned fur coats and caps. The Mongols were shamanists whose witch doctors claimed to mediate between humans and the world of spirits. Tengri, their supreme god, ruled over this spirit world, assisted by lesser deities. Fire was sacred as a purifying agent, and execution came to those who polluted running water. In 1206, the Mongols united under Temujin, a military leader of genius, better known as Genghis Khan. He set up his capital at Karakorum, and in 1212, filled with the idea of a heavenly mission to rule the world, Genghis Khan began the piecemeal conquest of China. His armies swept westwards through Central Asia, Persian and southern Russia to threaten the Byzantine Empire. Before his death in 1227, Genghis nominated his shrewd, genial but drunken son, Ogedei, to succeed him. After Ogedei's death, Batu, a grandson of Genghis, looted and laid waste to Eastern Europe, and another grandson, Hulagu, destroyed Baghdad in 1258, savagely killing 1 million people. Meanwhile, Kublai, a third grandson, completed the conquest of China. Ruling from Kumbuluk, Peking, he became nominally Great Khan of all the Mongol Empire by 1260, but Kublai had little real power outside China. Local Khans warred against each other, and the empire soon disintegrated. Here, Marco Polo, his father and uncle, are presented to Kublai Khan, conqueror of China. The European artist has Italianized the 4 Mongols standing at the rear, not knowing what they look like. Yes, I'm sure they definitely didn't look like that. Here, their great giant Mongol bowman hangs from one side of this horseman's belt. The quiver of valor is in the other. Here is comrades complete the erection of a gur or portable tent. The Mongols lived, moved and went to war as one single community. Hugely outnumbered by their victims, they almost always won through superior organisation. Political ineptitude rather than military defeat brought the final disintegration of their vast empire. So just as the Mongols were leaving China, the Mongol Khan Tamerlane took southern Russia in 1369 and set up his capital at Samarkand. Persia, Afghanistan, Mesopotamia, Syria and eastern Turkey soon fell to him. Timur, a brutal conqueror who built pyramids of human skulls, was nevertheless a devout, educated Muslim who encouraged art and science. When Timur sacked Delhi, he destroyed the Sultanate and over a century of instability followed. Then in 1526, Babur, a descendant of Timur, established the Mughal Empire from Delhi. This empire finally fell to the British in the 1700s. By then, the Mongols had become an obscure people confined to their bleak Buddhist land of Mongolia. Much of the history of the Maya and their neighbours remains something of a mystery. Their society was built on slavery, and a popular revolt may well have brought down their downfall. But here we have the Central Americans. The Mayan civilization stretched from Chichen Itza to the north to the Copan in the south. And here the ball game, played by several Central American peoples, took place in long rectangular courts. Players from opposing teams tried to knock a 15-centimetre diameter ball through a stone ring fixed high above them. Early basketball, I suppose. So the humid plain of Yucatan juts riverless into the Gulf of Mexico. It's monotonously flat, with thin soil barely sufficient to support the thorny scrub found in the north. This gives way to tropical forest in the central area that peters out as it approaches the Rocky Mountains to the south. This unfavoured spot and its surrounding area became known as the heartland of the first known American civilisations. The Olmecs came first, people known for carving huge stone heads, which you can check out in the Great Mysteries of Ancient Civilization series. A later people, the Maya, achieved spectacular success in astronomy and arithmetic and developed hieroglyphic writing. Yet they had no iron ploughs or wheels, no cattle, sheep, pigs, goats or horses. So the Olmec civilization sprang up about 1200 BC west of Yucatan. There, north-flowing rivers deposited silt to make the coastal plain more fertile. And at the island side of La Venta, the Olmecs constructed a pyramid temple characteristic of those in later cities of Central America. The other main traces of Olmec civilization, the huge basalt heads, stood 2 or 3 meters high and weighed up to 40 tons. As the stones for these heads had to be transported from a spot over 130 kilometers inland, transportation posed problems for the Central Americans. Although Olmecs mounted their toy clay figures on wheels, neither they nor any other American peoples put the wheel to practical use. The Olmecs carved miniature figures in jade as part of their Jaguar cult religion, yet they remained a Stone Age people, using only flint or obsidian tools. The Olmecs also invented systems of writing and arithmetic. About 200 kilometers southwest of the Olmec settlements around the Oaxaca Valley, the Zapotecs built a civilization that reached its peak about 300 to 900. The Zapotecs believed that their ancestors, whom they worshipped, sprang from trees, rocks, and jaguars. About 600 BC, the Zapotecs leveled a hillside overlooking Oaxaca Valley to construct the pyramidal buildings of their capital, Monte Alban, where many art treasures have been found in tombs. The Zapotecs reconstructed the city several times and built a religious center at Mitla, where they worshipped Cosijo, the rain god, and other deities. A collective priesthood ran the Zapotec kingdom, constantly organizing sport and warfare. The Zapotecs used the bar and dot system of Olmec arithmetic, and this and other features of Olmec Zapotec culture were taken over by the Maya. The beginnings of Maya civilization in Yucatan go back to before 1000 BC, but the greatest Maya period coincides with that of the Zapotecs, 300 to 900. Much of the history of Maya and their neighbours remains unravelled, and several mysteries remain to be solved. Here's a stunning mask modelled on skulls, forming a common theme of Mayan art. The mask shown here is made from some 200 pieces of jade, had shells for eyes. It was found in the sarcophagus of a secret tomb at Palenque. So the Maya were a short, dark people. Men stood on average about 1.5 meters high, women about 1.4 meters. In the tropical heat they wore few clothes, but two Maya customs particularly affected their appearance. In their civilization, an elongated head was the sign of beauty, so they strapped boards to the head of an infant, thus flattening the front part to produce a receding forehead. Mothers even dangled beads before the eyes of their babies to make them grow up with a squint, a feature that was also considered to be beautiful. Interesting. So between 300 and 850, the Maya built many cities, including Copan, Palenque, Piedras Negras, Tikal, Tulum, and Unazarzun. Temples, shrines, palaces, baths, and other buildings were constructed as pyramids with steep staircases leading to the tops. Scholars once believed that only priests and officials lived in these cities. They thought that the other people lived in clearings made in the jungle by cutting and burning the trees, and moved every 2 or 3 years as their crops exhausted the soil. Weather excavations at Tikal suggest that an area of about 130 kilometers around the central square was crowded with family compounds. Each compound had a plot of farmland around its buildings, where crop rotation was properly practiced. Good roads connected Maya cities. The ruling hierarchy included feudal lords who, as in Europe, received produce and services from the peasants. Slaves usually received tolerable treatment, but they could be sacrificed to the gods at any time, or after a knock on the head be entombed with their dead masters. What a way to go. The staple diet of the Mayan included maize, beans, root crops, sweet potatoes and pumpkins. Several other kinds of fruits and spices were grown, including melons and chilies. Doves, ducks, curassows, which are like turkey-like birds, and a breed of hairless dog were fattened for eating, and fish, snails, and the larvae of mud wasps were added to the diet. Deer, wild pigs, armadillos, and tapirs were hunted. Cacao beans, roasted, ground, and mixed with maize flour, provided a chocolate beverage, while stingless bees produced honey to make a fermented drink. Other stimulants included cactus juice, tobacco, and the hallucinatory drug mescaline from the peyote plant. The resin of copal trees provided incense to the temples. Rubber trees gave the material for making rubber balls, and from the chicle trees came chewing gum. Cacao beans were prized for being more than a food. They passed as currency in a society otherwise without money. I mean, I think other people would feel that way as well. Chocolate more valuable than money. Chichen Itza is a ghost city with well-preserved architecture. It's got the largest bull court in Central America. And in the foreground here stands the sacred jaguar, set by a temple dedicated to the jaguar cult. And below here, this ceramic vessel was made by a Toltec craftsman who worked without the potter's wheel. The Maya heaven had 13 layers above earth, and the Maya hell 9 layers below. Beneath the supreme but remote god Anabku, lesser deities included Quetzalcoatl, feathered serpent, a god shared with other peoples. At frequent religious ceremonies, dancers impersonated deities, while priests freely sacrificed birds and animals, and occasionally humans. Worshippers often drew blood to please the gods. The partly hereditary priesthood had many functions. Priests kept the calendars, and so decided when planting and harvesting should begin, buildings be constructed, or wars begin. Much concerned with time, the Maya erected stone slabs to record the end of each Khartoum or 20-year period. As keepers of horoscopes, the priests took to astrology, which led them onto astronomy, and they were able to calculate accurately the solar year and predict eclipses. The priests who kept arithmetical records using the bar and dot system of the Zaptecs dominated Maya art and the pictographic language. Even Pottertok, a strange Maya ball game, had religious associations. Spectators sat in tears watching players attempt the near impossible task of knocking a ball through a high stone ring. Betting was heavy on popular players. For some unknown reason, the Maya abandoned their cities by about 850, leaving the jungle to reclaim them. Some scholars think that a popular revolution occurred in which the peasants killed their priests and rulers, and as a result people moved from one area to another, and the old empire ended. The Itza, a people who, according to their own records, had abandoned the city of Chichen Itza centuries earlier, returned to it about 930. With them came a warrior people, probably Toltecs, whose leader was named Feathered Serpent. The old empire people hated the newcomers, who brought with them new styles of art with stiffly carved figures of warriors. The invaders found new cities including Uxmal and Mayapan, and their new empire flourished for over a century before disintegrating into civil war. Peace came in 1194, after the Itza suffered defeat by the warriors of Mayapan. The tyrannical rulers of this city dominated Maya territory until 1441. Then their subjects rebelled, killed their rulers, and sacked the city. Yucatan then split into many tiny city-states, fighting ceaseless civil wars. Decline was speeded by a devastating hurricane in 1464 and an unknown epidemic in 1480. In 1511, the first Spanish invaders arrived, bringing with them smallpox and ultimately the end of Maya independence. And this follows on to the Aztecs. The Aztec god, Huitzilopochtli, needed constant nourishment in the form of human blood, and in return for which he promised the tribe dominion over the neighbours. The Spanish conquistadors put an end to their domination. While the Olmecs, Zapotecs and Maya built up civilizations in and west of Yucatan, other interrelated cultures developed farther west. One small tribe, the Mexica or Aztecs, grew out of obscurity to found a great empire. But the way of life of this talented people was tainted by their obsession with blood sacrifice. About 100 BC, an unknown people began to build Teotihuacan, a place of the gods, the biggest city of Central American housing, about 200,000 people. For some mysterious reason, the city was abandoned about 750. This coincided with the decline of the Zapotecs of the Oaxaca Valley, whose culture came under the domination of the Mixtecs, craftsmen who produced fine works of art in stone, metal, wood, bone and pottery. So after subduing the Zapotecs in a series of long wars, the Mixtecs took over Monte Alban and Mitla. The Zapotec-Mixtec wars halted in the late 1400s when two enemies combined to fight a new warrior people from the north, the Aztecs. Here is a human skull used to shape this Aztec mask, a mosaic of turquoise, seashell and lignum. It might represent the great sky god. So according to their legends, the Aztecs took their name from Aztlan, White Land, the supposed place of their origin. About 1100s, they began a long migration in search of a home. For a while, they settled near the old ruined Toltec capital of Tula. There they learned simple agricultural techniques, irrigating farmland and building chinampas. They entrusted their fate to their god. This god, according to Aztec priests, needed constant nourishment in the form of human blood. In return, the priest said the god promised the Aztecs domination over their neighbours, but he ordered them to leave Tula and resume their wanderings. Just before 1300, the Aztecs reached the city of Chapultepec in the Valley of Mexico, the centre of the Toltec civilization. After the collapse of the Toltecs and the suicide of their last king, many people had migrated to the valley. The Aztecs, being the last to arrive, met opposition. Those Aztecs who survived the ensuing massacre threw themselves on the mercy of the city of Culhuacan, which had already sacrificed the Aztec leader to its own god. Surprisingly, the Culhua granted the Aztecs some nearby land, and although it was only a snake-infested rocky wasteland, the Aztecs prospered. They intermarried with the higher cultured Culhua and proudly called themselves Culhua Mexica people. However, as allies, the Aztecs proved so fierce that in about 1345 the Culhua tried to exterminate them. Culhua soldiers forced the Aztecs back to the edge of a swampy lagoon, and desperately they made rafts from javelins and spears padded with coarse grass. On these they floated out to the safety of a small reed-choked island in the lagoon. The Aztecs had reached their final home. So settled on the island, the Aztecs first built a simple shrine to Huitzilopochtli. Around it grew the city that became Tenochtitlan. 13 years later, the Aztecs built a second city, Tlatelolco, on a nearby island. The peoples of Tenochtitlan were warlike. Those of Tlatelolco were merchants and traders. Through trade, the Aztecs prospered, but three strong powers surrounded Tenochtitlan, ready to cut off its supplies. Unable to survive alone, the Aztecs had to choose an overlord. They therefore offered allegiance to the Tapanecs, who claimed to be the heirs of the unknown builders of the Teotihuacan. Through these three generations of the Aztec-Tapanec relationship changed. The Aztecs progressed from a state of humiliating subservience to junior partnership, and eventually to rivalry. To rid themselves of Tapanec domination, the Aztecs entered into a triple alliance with the anti-Tapanec state of Texcoco and with Tlacopan, a breakaway Tapanec city. After defeating the Tapanecs in 1428, macabre artifact from the civilization of the mixed text, an ornamental knife made out of chalcedony, used to cut out the hearts of human sacrifices. Skilled in anatomy, increased the skill their victims within seconds. This caricature of human sacrifice by Aztec priests was painted from memory by a man who in his youth suggested the Aztec emperor. Then he used to drag away the body of a victim to the foot of the temple steps and temple. The priest just cut out the heart of the second victim, which he holds up. A second priest is held as she stretches backwards to a stone wielding the knife. The blood some of the temple contains practice for the skull. Priests activate evidences and ceremonies. How macabre. Tenochtitlan joined the local and several small islands became a city of 65,000 people. Cross ways with multiple bridges they just did to the mainland north, west and south, and canals gave access to all parts of the city. Freshwater sized springs supplied the city with an aqueduct. Among the city's presence was the magnificent pyramid raised 2 years above the rock. There's a deity celebrated temples and special licenses. Aztec craftsmen died cloth experts made distinctive pottery of forms of clay and produced fine jewelry and artifacts of stone, jade, silver and gold. The Aztecs recorded important events and books of paper made from agave leaves. They used to paint graphic scripts similar to that of the Maya. In Montezuma II's time, the Aztecs produced the codices which recorded the organization of the empire and the payment of tribute. All goods that did not travel by water were carried by men. Agricultural techniques remained primitive, digging sticks being the main implements. Tributes arrived in Tenochtitlan and included things such as rubber, feathers, cacao, precious metals and stones. People also paid taxes to the government in the form of food, clothing, skins, silver, gold and feathers. Aztec warriors had similar equipment to Maya soldiers, except that they were wielding swords made of obsidian. Like the Maya, the Aztecs combined their solar and sacred calendars to find auspicious days. Time, they believed, was granted by the gods in 52-year cycles. At sunset on the final day of the cycle, people climbed to the summit of the Hill of the Star, an extinct volcano, and from here they anxiously scanned the sky for a certain star. At the exact moment when the time cycle ended, a priest kindled a fire in the open breast of a newly killed human victim. This macabre ceremony would help to ensure that the world would go on. As the vital star passed the center of the sky, the whole Aztec nation sent up a shout of joy, for the gods had allotted a new cycle of time for the world. From the time of his accession in 1502, Montezuma fought wars of annexation around Oaxaca. Nearer home, a war began against Tlaxcala and his allies in 1504, which brought no quick victory. As the conflict dragged on for over 13 years, the king grew more and more haggard and depressed, and vindictive towards his priests and astrologers. Aztec accounts say that many evil omens came to trouble him. Then in 1519, the reports of mountains moving in the sea. Spanish ships heading for Yucatan, where the Spaniards were welcomed as returning gods. And after a brief clash, the Tlaxcalans and Spaniards joined forces. This pact sealed the Aztecs' doom. 2 years later, Hernando Cortes, leading 1,000 Spaniards armed with guns, horses and iron weapons, captured Tenochtitlan for the second and final time and put an end to the Aztec civilization. Here is a wonderful Aztec tonal model where the reference books of the priests made from paper, made from beaten bark of wild fig trees. Paper makers cut them into long strips which they coated to make paint and then folded them like modern maps. Lovely. And we have here the Incas. So the Inca emperors were supposedly descendants of the sun, and they organised Inca society broadly as a welfare state at the expense of individual liberty. However, they pioneered pensions for the old and work for the disabled. Lovely and progressive. This empire of the Incas extended 4,000 kilometers north to the south, straddling the Andes through what is now Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and northwestern Argentina. The quipu, an ingenious system of recording numbers by means of coloured knotting cords, could also store coded messages. A hereditary class of quipus keepers kept and interpreted the quipus. Of course, it's famous for Machu Picchu, the Incans, the lost city of the Incas, found only in 1911, perched high in the Andes near Cusco. The Spaniards never knew of its existence, and a gold knife here made by a Chimu craftsman intended for use in religious ceremonies rather than in sacrifices. Civilizations emerged along the Andes Mountains and the western seaboard of South America in about 1000 BC. Several cultures centered on present-day Peru rose and followed for a period of 2,500 years. Although the peoples of Peru and Yucatan shared the same origins, no evidence has come to light to suggest that they were in contact. They had, however, several features in common. Both civilizations constructed pyramidal buildings that had broadly similar art forms, and in religion, both had blood sacrifice and a jaguar cult. The Inca tribe set up their capital at Cusco in about 1200, and had incorporated most neighbouring peoples into their empire by 1476. Inca emperors, supposed descendants of the sun, organised society broadly as a socialist state, using bronze tools and weapons, devised a unique system of counting, kept good roads, and introduced the potato to the rest of the world. However, they did not use the wheel, money, or written language. In South, as in Central America, the ruins of several mysterious ancient settlements still stand. The oldest known, Chavin de Huanta, lies high in an Andean valley over 1,000 kilometers northwest of Lake Titicaca. It dates from about 700 to 200 BC. Chavin's large, well-built stone temples have colourful sculptures of complex symbolism. Chavin art comprises ceramic ware, textiles and gold work, and its styles influence the arts throughout the surrounding region. On the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, on a plateau 4,000 meters above sea level, stood Tiahuanaco, believed to have been the religious and political capital of the Aymara Indians before AD 500. While Tiahuanaco still flourished, the Chimu culture developed around the Moche River. Its capital, Chanchan, covered 15 square kilometers, and at its center stood 10 walled buildings, which were probably palaces. Chanchan's tombs were containing gold and silver artifacts, jewelry, textiles and ceramic wares, and scales were found for weighing precious metals and stones. Because no system of writing existed, nothing records the history of these cities beyond their material remains. However, from their artifacts, it appears they heavily influenced a civilization built up by the Incas. So Inca, the name for the emperor, the empire and the tribe, derived from the name of the ruling family. Inca legends do not go back beyond 1200, when the first Inca emperor is said to have begun his reign. Inca history begins with the 9th emperor, Pakuaketec Inca Yapuninqui, who probably built the city of Cusco. He and his son Tupac Inca achieved a series of lightning conquests. Under father and son, the empire expanded to cover nearly 100,000 square kilometers with perhaps 8 million inhabitants, but it lasted only 2 generations. The very existence of the Inca Empire marked a triumph over geography. Most of its forts, towns and cities, including Cusco, Machu Picchu and Ollantaytambo, stood far up in isolated mountain valleys in the Andes. Despite the absence of wheeled vehicles, good roads connected these mountain settlements with outposts of the empire linking the hot, rainless deserts at the north to the tropical west coastlands at the south. The Inca Empire was a despotism with an absolute ruler, supported by a hereditary aristocracy, where all people had their place, the family, nobles, workers and slaves. Nevertheless, the well-being of each social order was taken into account. Censuses were taken and local government was geared to units of 10. Each 10 heads of family had a leader, and each 40,000 families a governor. In conquered territories, local officials were kept on to implement the Inca system. They imposed their own language, Quechua, upon the whole empire. Bureaucracy thrived, and government inspectors enforced the social and moral codes diligently. One of their many duties was to call from house to house, checking that women were good housewives and mothers. Right. Begging was unknown and unnecessary in this welfare state. Officials provided pensions for old people in the form of food and other necessities. They also allotted suitable work to disabled people and regulated their lives. Blind persons could marry only other blind persons, and dwarves had to marry dwarves. However, strict laws governed people's lives. Able-bodied boys and girls of marriageable age lined up in front of the governor for the boys to choose wives, and the governor settled pairing disputes on the spot. torture or death came to those who left one district for another without permission, and criminals received just but severe sentences. Wow, what an incredibly strict regime. Unlike the Central Americans, the Incas had two useful animals. Alpacas provided wool for clothes, and llamas served as light pack animals. Although llamas didn't pull ploughs, the Incas had much better farming implements than the Central Americans. Highland ploughing began in August, and farmers had to till land and then their own. The chief crops included potatoes and maize, from which they made chicha, a rough alcohol. They also chewed the dried leaves of the coca plant as a narcotic. Hunting was a privilege reserved for the nobility, although fish were caught along the coastlines and in lakes. Like the Maya, the Incas practiced the strange custom of flattening babies' heads by pressing them between boards. Surgeon priests practiced trepanning, which was cutting, drilling, or scraping out parts of the skull. The Incas used pebbles in a tray as a kind of abacus and weighed with scales and stone weights, but their main device for recording numbers was the quipu. They measured the time of day by the position of the sun, and probably had 3 10-day weeks in a month. Extra days were added occasionally. Early Peruvians were very well advanced in metallurgy. Inca bronzesmiths produced a variety of articles, ranging from axes to tweezers to ceremonial objects. Here are naturalistic scenes painted in bright colours, which make many Inca pots particularly distinctive. The Incas and their predecessors built with adobe and stone. Their stone walls interlocked exactly and needed no mortar. The Incas did not use the arch, but the roof of earth tombs around the Mocha River have a form of arching. Houses had wall vents for ventilation, but no chimneys. Smoke escaped through the doorways. Inca temples housed priests and cult objects rather than worshippers. Religious practices included offerings to Viracocha, the supreme god, and other deities. Fasting, consulting oracles, reading the organs of animals, omens, and blood sacrifice. At religious ceremonies, people danced frenziedly and became drunk from chicha. At death, they looked forward to either a luxurious heaven or a comfortless hell. Myths and legends surrounded that many deities often incorporated fabulous animals. Inca religion also included nature worship, stone worship, and belief in the creation of successive races of men by the deities. Here's a lovely little boat made from reeds called the Little Seahorses by their makers, which have been used for perhaps 2,000 years on Lake Titicaca. So when Tupac Inca died in about 1487, Huayna Capac succeeded him. At his death in 1525, the empire was divided between his two sons, Huascar and Atahualpa. By 1532, Atahualpa had imprisoned Huascar in a bid to win the whole empire. At this stage came invasion by some 177 Spaniards equipped with horses and firearms. Led by Francisco Pizarro, the Spaniards ambushed Atahualpa and held him hostage. Although the Incas paid an enormous ransom for Atahualpa, the Spaniards broke faith and killed him. In spite of civil war among the Incas, organized popular uprisings delayed the complete Spanish conquest until 1539. In time, Peru became part of the empire of the Western Europeans. And with that brings us to the conclusion of this wonderful book. So, thank you ever so much for joining me for this wonderful journey through the coming of civilisations. I've had a wonderful time getting to know them, and I hope you have too. Some fantastic jumping off points here for further learning and reading. I look forward to having you join me for more history